DaVinci Resolve is an incredibly deep application for video and audio post-production, and it's pretty much like having 5 or 6 applications all bundled into one. And if you've searched through many different videos on YouTube, you may have found that many people will speed through the features contained within Resolve, but if you're looking for instruction that is more simplified and slowed down a bit, then this video tutorial was created for you. If you take a look in the video description, you'll also find a link to where you can download the files that I'm using in this tutorial video so that you can download those and follow along. And I'd also like to mention before we begin that if you're struggling with getting started with this application and would like one-on-one instruction with me over Zoom, that is available, and you can find more information on that in the description of this video or the pinned comment below. And in fact, this video was inspired by a student of mine who expressed frustration with the fast pace at which many of the video tutorials for Resolve have. So feel free to grab some coffee, tea, wine, or beer, and let's just go ahead and jump into this. Now, as stated in the title, we're going to be working with DaVinci Resolve 19, which is in beta at the moment. And if you need help downloading that, I did create an in-depth tutorial on how you can go about downloading it for free. You can check out the link in the top right-hand corner for more information on that, or to be taken to the video on that rather. And when we launch Resolve, the first thing that we see is the project manager. And this is kind of a one-stop location where we'll see all of the projects that we're working on, and we can manage them and organize them here, place them in folders, and various management options. If we'd like to create a new project, then we can double-click on the untitled project here, or we can come down to the bottom and choose New Project. So I'll go ahead and click once on this, and then we're presented with a window for naming our project. I'll just call this Tutorial Project and press Enter. We're then taken to the cut page within Resolve, and the first thing that I'm going to do is come up to the top here where it says Workspace, and then I'm just going to click, and then we'll come down and choose the full screen window so we can get rid of that taskbar in Windows. Now, as I mentioned in the intro, Resolve is kind of like having 5 or 6 different applications all bundled into one, and they kind of represent the process of post-production, whereas ingesting our media, we would use the Media tab here. Then we have the cut page for quick editing. Then we have our edit page, which is what we're going to focus on in this video. Then we have our Fusion, which is going to allow us to create visual effects, animations, and work with green screen. We then have our color page, where we can work with color correction and color grading. Then we have Fairlight, which is essentially a DAW or a digital audio workstation contained within Resolve. And here we can do extensive mixing and automation for our projects. And then finally, we have the Deliver page where we can adjust various settings for exporting our video. But again, this is a made simple video, so we're going to focus all of our attention on the edit page, and we can accomplish most anything that we would need to do on this page. So if you have smaller projects or home video and you're not working on a feature film, again, you can pretty much do everything that you need to do within the edit page here. So the very first thing that we'll do is get a lay of the land and figure out how we can get to everything that we need and what all of the different panels are. So on the left-hand side, we have a panel here, and by default, this is going to be on the media pool. And actually, another thing that we'll do is come to the workspace, and then let's choose to reset the UI layout. This way, we'll all be on the same page and we'll all see the same thing. So I'll choose Reset UI Layout, and then I'll come back to Workspace, and let's go ahead and put this back into the full screen window. So now this looks a little bit different. And coming back over to the left, by default, we're going to have our media pool, and this is where we can import all of our various files, whether it's video, audio, or images, and we're going to take a look at that. We can also choose to see the various effects, and that's going to open up at the bottom here because our panel is in a larger mode. So at the top, we have our media pool for importing and organizing our media. Then at the bottom, we have our effects. We then have index, And we can see that that is now showing at the bottom of our panel here. And then we have a sound library. So Resolve does have a free sound library that you can download and install for free, and I'll cover that in a future video. But for now, we'll come back to the media pool, and just know that in the top left-hand corner, we have a button to shrink or expand this side panel out. So if I go ahead and click once to shrink this, then we have our media pool here, and our timeline is expanded out for the full length at the bottom of our window here. And now when I switch to the effects, we're just going to see the effects in this top panel, and the index we'll just see up here as well. So when we come back to this button and expand this out, then we'll be able to see two different panels at the same time when this is in the expanded mode. But let's go ahead and close out the index, and then I'm going to click on the button to shrink so that we have a larger view of our timeline. Now moving on to the right, we have two different viewers here. On the left, we have our source viewer. So when we eventually get to importing some media here, we can view that media in our source viewer. And then the second viewer to the right here is going to be our timeline viewer. So any media that we've imported and created our timeline, we're going to see that show up in this viewer here. Now we're seeing two different viewers because that is what Resolve is set to by default. And if I click on this single viewer mode button here in the top right-hand corner, then we're just going to have one viewer. But we'll switch that back on, and you can see we have these two boxes letting us know that when we click on this, we'll go back to the dual viewer mode. But I do want to mention that we have another side panel here to the right, just as we saw on the left-hand side. And once I say click on the inspector, we're going to automatically switch to the single viewer mode whenever we have a panel open here. So I can come to the metadata, and we can see that panel here. And then to the left of that, we have a mixer. So once we click on that, once we have media imported, we're going to have a mixer down here, and we'll take a look at that in just a moment. And then to the left of that, we have a quick export button, so we can actually export our videos from the edit page as well. And we'll come back to that a little bit later. Now, just as the panel on the left where we can expand this out for a larger view, we can also expand the panel on the right by clicking on this button here. So I'll go ahead and click, and this is going to function in a similar way in that if I were to go ahead and click on the inspector, then we can see two different panels at the same time. So at the top, we have our inspector, and at the bottom, we have our metadata. And if we were to go ahead and shrink the panel, we're only going to see one at a time here. But I'm going to go ahead and close out the inspector for now. Now at the bottom of each of our viewer windows, we have transport for controls for playing back our video. And below that, we have a toolbar for various options of importing our video. We have some tools for editing and some other settings for our timeline. And we have some zoom controls here on the right-hand side. We also have a volume control, and we have a dim to decrease or attenuate the volume of our project. If we click on the speaker icon, then we're going to mute our project audio. And then as we've seen, we have our timeline down at the bottom, and then we can switch between our various pages within Resolve as we've already seen. If I right click here, then we can choose to show icons only, and that's going to give us a touch more real estate within our timeline and main area up above. But I'll go ahead and right click and choose to show those labels again. We also have the same option at the top. So here we have icons and labels, but if I were to right click, we can choose to see icons only, and we can see that the labels are now removed. So if you'd like a more streamlined, less busy interface, then you do have these options. So let's take a look at importing media into our project. That's a very important step when we're beginning our editing. So we have our media pool active. I can come here to our media pool, and then I can right click and we have import media. We can also use the shortcut key Control and I, but I'll just go ahead and click here. And we now have an Explorer window. You'll have the Finder on the Mac. I'm going to go ahead and select the desktop, and I have a folder that I've prepared for this tutorial. I aptly named it for tutorial. I'm going to go ahead and double click on this, and then I have several different folders, one for audio, one for images, and one for video. So we'll go ahead and start with bringing some video in. I'll double click. Let's go ahead and click, hold, and drag to select all of these different video files, and then I'll choose Open. Now we're presented with a message here asking if we'd like to change the project frame rate. And what this simply means is that if you recorded your video on a camera at 24 frames a second or 30 frames a second, do you want Resolve to adopt that frame rate? And generally, we would like to do that. So I'm going to go ahead and click on Change. And then now in our media pool, we can see those 4 video files are here. Now I'm going to go ahead and right click again. Let's come back to Import Media. And then let's come back to the For Tutorial folder. I'll then double click on the Images folder, click, hold, and drag to select these, and we'll choose Open. And now we can see our 2 images populated in the pool. Let's again right click, and then we'll bring in our audio. Let's go a folder up to our audio. I'll click once to select, and then Open. So now we have our 4 video files, 2 images, and 1 single audio file. And if you notice that by default, when I hover over a video file, that's going to be previewed within our source viewer. And as I mentioned, that's what this first viewer is for, previewing our media. Okay, and as soon as I stop hovering, that is going to be removed. If I hover on our image, then that's going to be displayed. Okay, and if I hover on the audio file, we're going to hear that back. Now, if you'd prefer not to hear the audio as you're hovering and scrubbing, then you can press Shift and S as in Sam. So once I do Shift and S as in Sam and then hover again, we don't hear that audio playing back. But I'm going to go ahead and Shift and S to turn that back on. Now we don't have many files here, but if you're working on a project that does have a lot of files, you may want to organize those into bins. And then to the left here, we have a bin list. Now you should be seeing this because we reset our UI earlier in the video, but if for some reason you're not, we can click on this button here and you can see that that says bin list. I'll click once and we can see that that's hidden. So if you'd prefer not to see that, you can also hide it, but we'll go ahead and show that again. And then I'm going to right click in the bin list area and let's create a new bin. And while this is highlighted, we can see that cursor there. I'm going to call this video and press enter. And let's go ahead and drag our video files into the video folder, just dragging and dropping. And we've got one more here. Of course, we could select them and move them all at once. We'll come back over to the bin list and right click, new bin, and I'll call this images, press enter. Let's go ahead and select this one here and this by holding shift. I'll then click, hold, and drag these both into the images. And then we'll right click one more time, choose new bin, and we'll call this audio. And then now I'll click, hold, and drag this into the audio folder. So now we've got all of our folders organized into, or files rather, organized into several different folders. We can see audio, images, and video. We also see those in the bin list. So if I just would like to see the video within our media pool, I can click here. We see our 4 video files. Our images, we can see the 2. And then finally, our audio, we have our 1. Now let's come back to the video. And actually, if we click on master, then we can see all 3 of the folders, and we can also double click to show like that. If I come back to master, we can double click on video and then those are going to be displayed. So that's yet another way that you can access the different files. Now, as we've seen when we hover, we see the preview here in the source viewer, and it does go away. But if we'd like for our files to stick and stay here, then we can click, hold, and drag. And then now that's going to remain there. And I can press the space bar to preview this. And we can use the scrub bar here to scrub through our video. We can also use the transport controls to play forward or back. And this is also going to apply to our images. So as I hover on the image, we see that displayed. If I hover away or move away, then it goes back to our video. But if I double click on the image, then that's going to stick around here in our source viewer. Now let's come back to our video again, because I just want to show that we have this options menu. Or let's start here first, because we can click on this and then choose how our files are going to be displayed in the media pool. By default, this is going to be on clip name, but we can use file name, rail name, start, or duration. So if I choose duration, then these are going to change by the length of the video. But we'll come back to the clip name. So just know that you have that option to sort your videos here. We can also click here to perform a search for our various files. If we click on this button here, then we can choose to view our files in several different ways. So if I choose metadata, then we're going to see a thumbnail and we can scrub through. We also see a bit more details about that file. If I then come to list, then we just have a text list of our files. But we'll come back to the thumbnail view. Now, while we're in thumbnail view, we have this slider here where we can make these larger if we'd like. And then here we have an options menu where we can choose to show our audio waveforms and some other options here. Now, something else I'd like to mention is that if you would prefer not to have the live preview, and actually I think I'm going to turn off the audio scrubbing with Shift and S again. If we'd prefer not to see this live preview as we're hovering, we can come over to the options menu for our source viewer, these three dots here. And then we can turn the live media preview off. And then as I hover, we no longer see that live preview in our source viewer, although you will see that on the thumbnail for your video and audio files. But we'll go ahead and turn that back on. And we have some other options here for our viewer as well. And we may take a look at these, at least a couple of these, depending on how much time we have here. Okay, so now let's take a look at importing our media into the timeline. So say we'd like to start with this very first video here. Now, as you can imagine, we can click, hold, and drag that to our timeline below. Let's place this at the beginning. And then now we've got our video file easily loaded into the timeline. And we can press the space bar to play that back. And then we can see our timeline viewer is then going to display our video here. Okay, and then again, if I come over to the media pool, then our source viewer is going to show our source video. So that is the purpose of having two different viewers here. Now, if we'd like to remove a file from our timeline, we can simply click once to select it, and I'm going to press backspace, and then that's been taken out because I'd like to show another method that we can use for importing our video. So I will double click on this first video file to make that active in our source viewer. And then I can click, hold, and drag this to the timeline viewer, and we have an overlay that pops up with several different options. So the first one at the top, we have insert. So if I go ahead and release that, then that's going to be placed in our timeline at the position where our playback cursor is located. So you can see this is not placed at the very front of our timeline because our cursor was here. So let's go ahead and Control Z to undo that action. And if I place the playhead cursor here, I'll go ahead and click that first video, drag it over. Let's choose insert. And then we can see that it's placed where that cursor was. We'll again undo. Let's move our cursor back to the beginning, and we can actually use home, the home key on your QWERTY keyboard, to take that back to the beginning. And we'll actually take a look at these buttons here, because we can also use these to insert our media into the timeline. So this first one, we have insert clip. And if you notice there's F9. So you can use the shortcut F9 if you prefer using shortcut keys. But I'll go ahead, while our video file is highlighted, I'll click once. And now we can see that that's been added to our timeline. So you have numerous different ways that you can import media into the timeline. You can just choose whichever way works best for you. Now I'm going to click in the ruler up above here to position our playback cursor there, just to show that if we move on to this second video file, let's double click on that to make it active in our source viewer window. We can click, hold, and drag to the timeline viewer, and we have the option to append at end. So this is going to place that video file after the clip that we've already inserted here. Now it actually automatically did that, even though I didn't mean to. So let's Control Z to undo. I'll click, hold, and drag. Let's come to the bottom here where it says append to end. And now we can see that that's added to the end of the first clip that we brought in. And let's actually move our playhead cursor back a bit here at this edit point. And with our third file active in the source viewer, I'm going to click, hold, and drag. We have the overlay. And this time I'm going to choose place on top. And then when we make use of that, we can see that a second video track has been added, and that video has been placed on top of our second clip, and our audio is below here. So if you have B footage that you'd like to add to your project, then that can be an option to use, and that is the place on top. But we'll actually come down and remove this out just by clicking once. We can see both of these are highlighted. So while they're highlighted, I'll go ahead and click on backspace. And let's actually take a look at some of the settings within our timeline here. Now, we can click or hover on this center line, and you see that we have these double arrows that pops up as soon as we hover there. And with this, we can adjust the placement vertically of our video and audio within the timeline. And then let's actually jump ahead a little bit, because we have the video 2 and audio 2 tracks that are still here from the B-roll footage that we had brought in. Now, if we right click here, we can choose to delete that track. We can also choose to delete empty tracks. So I'm going to go ahead and select that. And then we can see our second video and audio tracks have then been removed at once. If I come over to the right in the timeline, I can hold Shift and use my mouse wheel to zoom in vertically on our video tracks. If I hover at the bottom while holding Shift and using the mouse wheel, we zoom in on our audio. Now we can also come over here to the track header, and at the top, we see we have the double arrows, and we can click, hold, and drag to change its size here, as well as our audio. We can click on the title here once, and just look, we'll call that food since that's what we're seeing here. And then we can change the name for our audio track as well. And we can see here a little label where it says 2 clips, 2 clips. So this is just letting you know how many clips are in here. There's not much going on with this so far, and we can just look and visually see that. But if you have a large project with many clips, and you'd ever like a quick reference to see how many clips you have on your tracks, then you can just take a look here. Now, right-clicking again, we can change the track color at the very bottom of this pop-up menu here. So I could come and let's change this to the orange, and we can see that that's updated there. For our audio, we can right click here as well. We have change track color. Let's go ahead and select blue. We'll come back to the track header and right click again. And here we can add a track, and then we can see here we have video 2, but we will delete that back out. We can also add multiple tracks at a time by clicking on Add Tracks. We can change the number here, as well as for the audio tracks. But we'll go ahead and cancel out and right-click again. And then finally, we have Add Subtitle Track. Also, if we had multiple tracks still within the timeline, we can move tracks up or down by making use of the options here. Now moving on, we have a little lock here, and if I were to go ahead and activate this lock, this track is then going to be locked in place, so our video is locked. And one thing that we can do while this is active is come to our audio. So if we'd like to trim our audio but keep our video in place, we can lock it, and then I'll come to the audio, hover at the left edge here, and we see we have this bracket that pops up, and I can then pull this in and trim that, but our video is going to remain in place. But let's go ahead and undo, and let's unlock the video track. We'll then come down to our audio and perform that same trim. Let's click away from there and come back. And now we can see we're trimming both at the same time. And an important thing to take note of is that whenever we're performing a trim, Resolve is going to give us this little white frame showing us the original length of our video. Okay, so I'll go ahead and leave that trim as it is. And then we can see we have this green vertical line here letting us know that there is other material that has been trimmed from this particular clip. So if I come to the clip here to the right and select that, let's click once on its left-hand side. Now we see we have a red vertical line, and that lets us know there is no other material that we can then trim to the left of here. If I hover with the single bracket and try to trim to the left, nothing's happening. That red bar lets us know there's nothing there. Okay, if I trim to the right, we can see that red vertical bar changes to green, and we have that white frame that we've already talked about. Okay, now we have this empty space here, and a cool feature within Resolve is that I can click once in this empty area. We see that this is a little bit light gray now, and I can press backspace to kind of ripple edit and move this second clip forward. And let's actually move forward in the timeline a little bit here and play this back. Okay, and we can see that that quickly jumps between our two clips there. If we'd like to add a transition, we can actually hover at this edit point, and we see we have the double brackets. So up above we have the single arrow, and then here we have the single arrow. When I come here, we have the single bracket, but then at this edit point we have double arrows, and here I can right click, and then we can add a cross dissolve, whether it's going to be 18 frames, 36 frames, and so on here. I'll just choose 36. And now we can see that a transition has been added to our video and audio tracks. Let's come back again. And now we see we have a smoother transition between our files, or clips rather. Now we can still adjust the length of this transition, and I'm actually going to zoom in a bit in our timeline, and we have several different options for zooming. So I can hold Alt and use my mouse wheel, and we're going to zoom in on wherever I have my mouse. So if I position the mouse arrow over here and zoom in, we're zooming into that area. Okay, if I would like to zoom in specifically on our edit point where that transition is, then I would need to hover there. Now this is the default behavior. If you'd prefer to zoom in where your playback cursor is, then we can come up to the top here and come to View, and then we have Zoom Around Mouse Pointer, which is the default. If I deselect that and then hold Alt, use the mouse wheel, then now we're going to zoom to our playback cursor. We can see that that's now centered in our timeline. So even though I'm zooming out over here with the arrow and the mouse wheel, we're zooming around that playback cursor. Okay, but I'm going to change this back to the default Zoom Around Mouse Pointer because we want to zoom in here on our transition. And then I'm going to click once, and we can see that these are both highlighted. I can come to the edge and we have the double arrows. I can then click, hold, and drag this out like so. And we're going to have a longer transition here. And at this point, I think it will be a good idea to take a look at the inspector because we can also make some adjustments to our transitions there. Now, the inspector we can access, as we saw earlier in this tutorial, by clicking on this button here. And now we, as mentioned earlier, switch to the single viewer mode. And with the red bracket around our transitions, we have various settings for it here within the inspector. So the inspector is just going to provide us with a lot of different settings or parameters that we can adjust for our video clips, our audio, and many other things. It's an incredibly useful area within Resolve that you should take the time to get to know. But we can see we have our transition type at the very top, and that's cross dissolve. And that's because when we right click here, well, we've already have the transition added, so it's not showing up again. But if you remember, those showed up there. But we can change the transition. Let's come back a little bit in our timeline, and we can choose band wipe. So let's just see what that looks like. We'll go ahead and press the space bar. Okay, so it's a little bit cheesy, but just know that you can come to this top drop-down menu and choose a different transition type. Okay, but we'll take that back to the additive dissolve. We can also change the duration. So by click, hold, and dragging left or right, just take note of the transition in the timeline. We can see that that is lengthening or shortening depending on our adjustment here. We can also adjust that in frames. We can set the alignment here. So by default, that's on center. So we can see that that transition is centered between our two clips. If I choose this here, we can see that that's now on the left-hand side. Coming to this one here, it's now on the right. But we'll take that back to the default. We have a start ratio, end ratio. These are a bit beyond the scope of this tutorial. We have some easing, so we can ease in, out, or in and out. So we'll quickly take a look at that. Let's choose the in and out, and we'll again lengthen this out a bit so we can just see what that looks like. And if you take note here, we can see the ease in and out represented with this gray area here. But let's play that back. Okay. And then we have some adjustments at the bottom here for our audio. So by default, this is going to be on crossfade 0 dB, which is just going to provide a linear response for that audio transition. But we can also choose crossfade plus 3 dB or minus dB. And we also have the alignment option here as well. Now, something to be mindful of about the inspector is that whatever you're working with here, you're typically going to have this little circle with an arrow here, and this is a reset button. So anytime we would like to reset a setting, so let's say we adjust the start ratio here by click, hold, and dragging to the right. We're taking that up to 91. I can then click on this circle here, and that's going to reset it to the default. I'll again take that up to 91. I can also double click on the title, and that's going to take it back to the default as well. Now, up at the very top here, this is kind of our master reset, and that's going to reset every parameter within our video transition area here. So I'll go ahead and click on that, and then we can see that this has been taken back. So any adjustments here, if you'd like to start from the very beginning, the default, then you can click on this button here. Now let's come back to the timeline, and we're going to zoom out a bit. And so far I've just been holding Alt and using the mouse wheel, but also know that we have a few other options here. So I can also use this slider and then click, hold, and drag this to zoom in or out. I can also use these buttons here. So if we click on this, this is going to be our detail zoom. So we're going to zoom in quite a bit on our clips. Then we also have a full extent zoom. So once I click on this, this is going to show all of the clips that are within our timeline. So just be aware that you have these options as well for zooming. Now our transitions are still highlighted, and you can see that by the red frame, but maybe we would like to work with some of the parameters or settings for our video. So let's go ahead and click on this second clip here and just take note of our inspector area. Once I click once, then we now have the option to work with our video and audio. So I'll select video, and then we see we have some transform parameters that we can make adjustments to. Now our playhead is on this particular clip, so we're seeing that in our timeline viewer. Now I can come to the zoom here, click, hold, and drag, and we can zoom in on this clip. Now this is going to apply to the entire clip. Okay, but if we would like to have a gradual zoom in over time, over the period of time over our clip, while we're here, I'm going to go ahead and click on this diamond icon there, and that's going to add a keyframe to the zoom setting. And let's actually redo that. So again, we can click there, and now this is taken back to the original zoom state. We can see that. So now I'm going to go ahead and click the diamond to add a keyframe here. Let's come to the end of our clip, and then I'm going to come to the zoom, and let's zoom in quite a bit here. And then once I release, that's going to automatically add another keyframe for us. Let's come back to the beginning. And now when we play back, we can see that it is now zooming in automatically for us because we added those keyframes. Now, if we'd like to see those keyframes, then we can click on this diamond button here. And now we can see the two keyframes that we've added there. And we can also use this arrow up above to navigate to our different keyframes. So we're at the end, so we only have a right arrow. But if I click once, now you can see this immediately jumps to that first keyframe that we added. And now we have an arrow to the right. And this is going to take us to the second keyframe. So I'll click there on the right facing arrow. And now you can see that we jump here. Now, if I click on this button here that's next to the diamond, then we're taken to the transform editor and we can do some transforming and add curves to the keyframe that we've done, but that's a bit beyond the scope of this video. I just wanted to mention that that is available, but we'll click once to hide that. And if we'd like to remove our keyframes, we could also click on the button here, but we can come to the transform panel there and click once to select it. Once it's highlighted red, I can hit backspace. Let's select that one. And I can also hit backspace there. And then our keyframes have now been removed. And we can see that we no longer have the arrow up above here next to the zoom. Now let's come a little bit forward in our timeline. Just below our zoom, we have position. So we can adjust our X and Y position for our video. Let's reset our Y. Reset. We then have our rotation angle, so we can adjust the slider here. We can also click, hold, and drag left or right on the numeric field here. We'll reset this. We have fields for setting our anchor point, our pitch, and yaw. And so these can also be cool to add keyframes to as well. We can flip our video. And then below the transform, we have cropping. So anytime that you'd like to see the parameters for a particular area, you can click once on its title and we can see our cropping has now expanded out. If I click on crop left, we can see that that's being cropped left. We'll go ahead and reset that. As you imagine, crop right is going to adjust the right, the bottom, and the top. We then have a softness that we can add there. Okay, and I'm going to come to the top and click the master reset button there. Again, if we'd like to hide these parameters for the cropping, then we can click on this button there. And actually, before we move on, I just want to make the point that we can come to these parameters and make the adjustments for the cropping and the transform and so on. But we can also come to the button here in the bottom left of our timeline viewer window. And if I go ahead and click on this, then we can see how we have this frame with handles at the edges here, the corners and the edges here. So if I were to go ahead and click on this and drag this in, then you can see that we are adjusting the horizontal zoom, and you can notice that the zoom is being adjusted here. So if you'd prefer to work in this way, you can always do that. If we'd like to reset what we've done, we can come over here and click like so. If I come to one of the handles on the corner, then we're going to adjust the horizontal and vertical zoom both at the same time, and we can see that our parameters are changing within the inspector here. We'll again reset that. Now this is going to be on the transform by default, but if we click on this downward facing arrow and I choose crop, and then let's come to this handle here and pull that in, and now you can see in our inspector the cropping, the crop right is being adjusted. If I adjust here, that's adjusting our frame. So just know that if you prefer working maybe in a more visual, hands-on way, you can do that directly within the viewer window here. Okay, let's go ahead and reset that. Coming back to the downward facing arrow, we can also add dynamic zoom, which may be a bit beyond the scope of this video, but now that I've added that, let's go ahead and play this back. Let's scroll down in our inspector because we do need to actually activate the dynamic zoom. Okay, so now once that's acted, we'll go ahead and come back to the beginning. So the green is going to be where we start at, and the red frame is where we end up at. Okay, so if we'd prefer to start at the original zoom level, then we can bring out the green. I'm going to use my mouse wheel to zoom out a bit, and then let's bring in this is a little bit tricky at times. Let's bring in our red frame and say we want to end up zoomed in very close. We'll bring the green frame back out. So now we should start at our normal zoom and zoom in pretty close here. Okay, but we'll go ahead and turn the dynamic zoom off. Come back to our downward facing arrow. We have Open Effects Overlay, Fusion Overlay, and Annotations if you'd like to work with annotations. Okay, let's undo that, and we'll take this back to the default of the transform, and we'll turn that off just by clicking once there. And then let's be sure everything is reset. And I think we'll move on from the rest of these other parameters because they're a bit beyond this beginner tutorial. But while our clip is selected, our audio is selected as well. Just know that we can also access settings for our audio here. So if we'd like to adjust the level for this audio clip specifically, then we can also come here and click, hold, and drag to the left. We can click, hold, and drag on our numeric field or the slider here. And if you take notice of the waveform within the window below, that is kind of going away once I take this down. Okay, now if you notice there's a horizontal white line here that's moving up and down as I make this adjustment. So we can also come to our audio clip, and then at the top we have the arrow, but once I hover on that horizontal white line, we have double arrows. I can click, hold, and drag to make that adjustment to the level for this audio clip as well. And then as I adjust that, you can see that this is being adjusted here. Okay, let's go ahead and reset that. Now again, this is very important to realize that these adjustments that we're making to the audio are going to be specifically to the clip or clips that you have highlighted with the red frame. Now below that we have panning. So okay, we'll reset that. And of course, you could do some cool keyframing and tweak the panning here. For some special effects, we have a dialogue leveler that we can toggle on and make some adjustments here. We then have pitch, speed change, and we have an equalizer. So we can just use the toggle here to turn the equalization on and make some adjustments to our audio. Boosting our high frequencies. If we activate band 1, then we can come here and take out low frequencies. We have kind of a telephone effect there. But we'll turn that off, and let's go ahead and power our equalizer off, and we'll go ahead and reset it. Now, another important thing to be aware of is that if we would like to adjust the audio properties of our entire audio track, okay, we have this selected here with our red frame, but if I were to come over to the track header for our audio and click once, our inspector changes. So take note of the inspector. I'll click on the audio clip. This then updates for parameters for the clip specifically. If I come to the audio track header, now we're going to be adjusting our volume for all of the clips on our track, and the dialogue leveler is going to adjust for our entire track. And then we also have a ducker here. So when you're making adjustments here, it's important to be mindful of what you have selected within your timeline so that you're not adjusting the wrong thing. Now let's bring our focus back to the timeline because there's a few other settings that I would like to cover here. Now, something important that we're all going to want to do is splitting our clips. So we can position our cursor anywhere within our timeline by clicking in the ruler up above, and we can use Control B, and then now we've created a split. We have a new edit point here. I'll undo that with Control Z. I've actually added S as a shortcut for splitting because when I'm doing heavy editing, I don't want to use two keys to add that. So I've added S. So then I can do a split like so. Come here, S, come here, and S, S. So anytime you'd like to add your own shortcuts to Resolve, we can come up to the top left where we have DaVinci Resolve here. We have keyboard customization. Then we can come to the search field here and I'll type in split. And then let's scroll down a little bit and we can see we have timeline split clip. And then here we can see where I've added the S. If you'd like to add your own, just click on the plus. And then while this red frame is there, you can press the key and then that's going to be added for you. Anytime that you'd like to remove a shortcut, just hover on the X and click once to remove it. Let's go ahead and clear the search by clicking on the X here, and we'll close out of our keyboard customization. Now we saw earlier in the video that we can select a clip and say lock the video track, and then we can adjust our audio independently, but we have a couple of different options for doing this as well. So I can select while these are both highlighted in the red frame, and then right click, and we can unlink these clips. Okay, so now I'm going to click in an empty area. This is an important step to deselect them. And then when I come back, I can select our audio independently, or I can click to select our video and adjust it independently. Now I'm going to click once to select our video clip, hold shift and select our audio, right click, and then choose to link clips again. You can also use the shortcut here, Control Alt and L. I'll click away, select our video, and now you can see these are both functioning as one unit again. Now the final method is that we can use the link button here. So this is active by default, but if I deselect it, then any clip that I select is going to be available for independent adjustment. So any clip in our timeline. But we'll go ahead and undo, and we'll turn this link back on. Next to that, we have this little magnet, and that's just our snapping. So if I click, hold, and drag to the left, and I come here, if you take notice how that kind of jumps that snapping to the nearest clip. If I pull this back and position our playhead cursor here, and then come here, you'll notice that that snaps to our playhead. So if you don't want to have that behavior on, then you can always turn this off, and we're not going to have that snapping behavior. We'll go ahead and turn that back on. Now, since we're on the topic again of trimming, there's a really cool tool that I would like to show you guys. And this would be the trim edit mode. So we can access that by clicking on this button here or pressing T as in Tom on our QWERTY keyboard. So this is not active right now. And if I were to come to the beginning, so say there's a particular part that I would like to remove, but I don't want to have this empty space here, and I'd like for everything to be pulled forward. So I'd like to remove this area here, and I'd prefer not to have to come here and click, hold, and drag, select everything, and then pull it forward. So I'm going to undo that, and let's undo again to get rid of that trim. Now, if I press here, or again, T to make this active, and then come to that beginning, I can perform that trim, and Resolve is automatically going to pull everything forward for me, like so. Now, I can also do this at our edit points here. So maybe if I come here and perform a trim, we can see everything is being pulled forward. If I want to trim to the right, then everything is going to be pushed back. So this is an incredibly useful mode or tool that we can make use of. And I'm going to come back to the selection mode, and we can also choose A to activate that. And just to show that when we have the double brackets, we can actually move our edit point between these clips here. If you notice, our viewer turns into, we see two different displays. So the one on the left is going to show the end of our first clip, and the one on the right is going to show the first frame of our second clip. Now this is both the same video, so that it's not really useful. But let's come to our transition here, and I'm going to zoom in, hold Alt, use my mouse wheel, click once. Let's actually take that out by pressing backspace. So here at this edit point, we're switching between two clips. So let's come to that edit point where we have the two brackets. And then now this makes a bit more sense here. So as I click and drag left or right, then we can see that on the left-hand side of our viewer, we see the last frame of this first clip. And then on the right-hand side, we see the first frame of our following clip. Now let's position our playhead cursor here at this edit point, and then let's come back to our media pool here and select the images here. And I'm going to double click to make this active within our viewer. And let's actually close out our inspector. And what if I'd like to insert this image where our playhead cursor is? So I can click, hold, and drag this. And then we can choose Insert up at the top. And now we can see that this has been inserted at that edit point, and our other clips have then been moved out. Let's actually click on the full extent zoom so then we can see all of our clips that are within our timeline. So again, I'm going to position my cursor here at this edit point, and let's come to the second image. I'll double click to make that active within the source viewer. I can then click, hold, and drag, and again, we'll choose Insert. Let's come back to our video, because there is something else that I forgot to mention as far as importing our video to the timeline, and this is actually a really cool feature. So if we double click here to make that active in our source viewer, notice that at the bottom here, it's a little bit hard to see because this is white, but when we hover, we have this overlay. So the first one is a film strip. The second one is an audio icon of a waveform. So if we have a particular file, video file, where we'd like to just import the video and leave out the audio, because if I were to click, hold, and drag this, as we've seen earlier, and say place on top, then we see that we have a second. I'm going to hold Shift and use my mouse wheel to zoom out a bit so we can see everything. Okay, so we see how we have that second video track and the second audio track that's been added. And this has been placed on top, our audio track on the bottom. But what if we don't need this audio? Let's undo that, import, and then now I'm going to click on the film strip. Click, hold, and drag, place on top. And now we can see we have just imported the video for this particular file. Now let's undo. And again, here we have the waveform icon. If I just would like the audio from this file, I can click on that waveform icon. Let's drag that over. And in this case, we'll just choose Insert, and we can see that that's pushed everything to the right and put it on our original audio track. If I come back again and choose Place on Top, then we can see that it is now added at the bottom in addition to our original audio. Let's right click on that audio header, and we'll go ahead and delete that track. And the last thing we'll take a look at for importing files would be the audio, because we haven't brought in an audio file here, at least separate from a video clip. So here we have our audio file, and I have Shift and S, the audio scrubbing, turned off. But if I were to Shift and S, Then of course we can hear this back. I can also double click to make that stick and stay in our source viewer and use the space bar to audition that. But then I can come here and click, hold, and drag and bring that in like so. So we have an audio track that we'd like to import into our project, and we can do like so. If we'd like to create a fade, then we can come to the top right hand corner and pull that in. We can adjust the curve for that by clicking on that handle there.
Oh yeah, that's beautiful.
We can create a fade out.
And you got pepper in there too.
Now I mentioned the mixer way earlier in the beginning, so we can come to the mixer and make that active. So then here we have these channel strips where we can, or faders rather, where we can adjust the levels, the relative levels of our video audio and our soundtrack, little song that we brought in. So I can come here. So we can make those adjustments there. And another thing that I want to mention about the audio is that we talked about this horizontal white line and that we can use this to adjust its level. But we can also, while we have those double arrows while hovering on that horizontal white line, if I press and hold Alt and click once, we can see that we add this red circle there. I'll come here, click once, here, and click once. So if you need to adjust levels for a particular area, I'll then come to this center one and pull this down. So now
The oil must be very hot.
So if you have a particular area of your audio that's a little bit too loud, too aggressive, then you can add these points and then make the adjustments to take its level down. If you'd like to remove, just be sure that it's highlighted in red and then press backspace. Let's come to this one here. I'll click once, that's highlighted in red, and backspace. Let's come here and backspace. And we can see in our mixer here that these are labeled audio 1, audio 2, and bus 1. But I can come here and just call this soundtrack or sound bed. And then we can see that that's updated in our mixer. I'll click once and call this video audio and press enter. So this can help you more easily identify your audio channels here when you're working with adjusting your levels. We then have solo, so we can solo our audio tracks like so. We also have those controls here in our track header. We can mute. Okay, so just some other useful controls to be aware of. And we're hopping around quite a bit here, but you saw that I added a fade in for our audio. Now we can also do the same thing for our video. So if I want to add a fade in here, I can click on the handle there, and then we can see that that pops up as I hover over this video clip. We have the handles there and there. So if we like a fade out at the end of our video, we can do like so. Let's come back to the beginning of our timeline by pressing the home key on our QWERTY keyboard and take a look at that fade in and for our video and audio. Let's add another fade in here for the first audio for our video. Okay, now we're going to go ahead and wrap up here because this is going on a little bit longer than I had intended. And I know we've been hopping around quite a bit, but there are some navigation controls that I think it's incredibly important to be aware of. So for getting around within our timeline, we can use the up and down arrows on our QWERTY keyboard. So if I press the up, then you can see that our playhead cursor moves forward in our timeline. So if I press the downward facing arrow on the QWERTY keyboard, then we move between our edit points here. Okay? So using the up and down arrow, we can navigate within our timeline. Now also we can use the right and left arrows. If I press the right arrow once, then if you take note here of our time display, we're moving frame by frame when I tap the right arrow. If I press and hold, we kind of move back in real time, though it's a bit choppy. If I press the left arrow one at a time, we move back to the left one frame at a time, holding the left arrow. As you can imagine, we play back in reverse. So again, tapping once, we move one frame at a time, the right and left arrows. Now if I were to hold shift and tap once, you can again look at the time display here. Then we move 1 second at a time within our timeline. Okay, now some other important keys to be aware of would be J, K, and L. So if I were to press L, then we're going to play back in real time. If I press L again, we're going to play back a bit quicker. If I press again, then we move forward even more quickly. I can press K to stop. If I press J, we play back in real time in reverse. I can press J again and then stop. So this can be useful for instance, adding splits. So as I mentioned, I added S as my shortcut for adding splits. So if I'm trying to find an area, I can go back and then maybe press S to add a split there. Maybe here, I can stop. And if I hold K and tap on L, then we're going to move forward one by one frame at a time. And then once I found the point, I can press S to make my split, or Control B is the default again. While holding K, I'll tap on J. Okay, maybe here I want to do another split, so I'll use my split shortcut. So these keys can be useful for J, getting around within the timeline and performing your edits. Okay, so we've gone on for quite a while, guys, and the last thing we'll take a look at is how do we export our final project once we're finished with it? Now, as I mentioned, we can do pretty much everything we need to do in the edit page, and we can export our video from here by using the quick export. So when we click on that, we can see our quick export window, and we can make use of one of the presets here. So if you wanted to do YouTube, you can then select that, and then just click on export, and that's going to be rendered down for you. Very easy. Now, if you're someone who likes to have more detailed control of the settings, the parameters of your exported audio file, what it's going to be, then we can hop over to the deliver page. So I'll come down to the bottom and let's click on deliver. And then now here to the left-hand side, you can see that we have presets up at the top. So we have the same H.264, 265, YouTube. But if we scroll over, we can see that we have even more here, even for Final Cut. We can do audio only, okay, Dropbox. But once you've made a selection, we can see that the parameters are then updated, and we can then come in and choose our format, MP4 or QuickTime. We can choose our resolution. So we can go up to 4K and various other parameters like for our audio codec, our encoding profile. So a ton of different options are available to you depending on what you select. If you have 264, then you can even come over to the audio here, the file, and make further adjustments. If you're going to be working with a particular file on a regular basis and you have settings that you would like to apply to that particular file with each of your projects, you can make those adjustments and then come up to the options menu here and save a new preset with those settings. So that's an option as well. Now, once you've made your adjustments, I'll select the YouTube here. We can then name our file. I'll just call this tutorial, and we can choose a location here. Typically, this is going to be blank, but we can click on the browse. Let's select our desktop, save. You'll see your file path there. We've got our resolution, frame rate. Then we can come to the bottom and then we can choose to add that to our render queue. Okay, now there's another one here. I actually had a fail during the initial screen capture and it quit working on me, so I had to start over. So this was never recorded and I had to restart from a certain part in this video. So if we have a job that we'd like to remove, we can click on the X and remove that out. This is the one that we just added. And then all we have to do is click on render all. And then this is going to begin the render process and you'll have your completed final video file at the location that you've chosen here, which would, for me, would be my desktop. Okay, so we've covered a heck of a lot. From the interface layout, navigating the timeline, importing our audio, video, image files, to organizing them, navigating the timeline, working with the inspector and adjusting the parameters of our video and audio files and clips, understanding the viewers. I know it was a lot to take in, but you can always watch the video back in pieces and watch the different areas that are most important to you. I'll try to get together an index for this video to make that a little bit easier to do. And again, if you're interested in one-on-one training to help speed up your learning curve with Resolve, definitely check out the description of this video or the pinned comment below. The one-on-one training is done with me over Zoom, and you can actually share your screen with me and even allow me control so that I can directly guide you through whatever features and concepts of Resolve that you'd like to learn. The meeting can also be recorded so that you have a video file for your future reference. And with that, we'll go ahead and wrap up. I hope to see you in the next tutorial, and thanks for watching.